Welcome back to Under Oath. Today we have Dr. Erin Nance, orthopedic surgeon, TikTok influencer, co-host of The Medical Detective, and new book out, Little Misdiagnosed. Erin, can you hear me?
I can. Thanks so much for having me, Jeff.
I came from my stepfather was a doctor. I've seen more hernia surgeries than I could possibly want to. What I love about watching your videos is it's like a friend is telling you this advice. You know, it's not like, let me explain what's going on with you. First off, you make me feel okay to tell you my story.
I mean, that is the highest compliment that I can receive. When I first started online, it was during COVID, and I was only seeing like 10 patients a week. And I just thought it was a shame that only 10 patients could benefit from the knowledge and expertise that I had accrued for so long. And when I went on TikTok and I started telling all these stories and they were, viral. But what I understood I was doing is I was reaching people at scale, right? Millions of people could benefit from the education and the stories that I was sharing. So it took me by surprise. I call myself an accidental influencer, but now I really have understood the power.
What I find scary is I'm also a lawyer. So when people come to me, well, I read online, I did this online, I'm going, please stay away from the internet. Please don't get your information from this because it could be so generic that you have no clue. You're talking about this issue that doesn't apply to you. And how difficult is it for you sometimes that when you meet with somebody, you give them this diagnosis and they're like, well, I read something that's different from what you're telling me.
Well, I will tell you that my dad was the general counsel for Lenox Hill Hospital and many hospitals. So I grew up with a medical attorney father. And what I tell patients is that, listen, I get people come into my office all the time telling me they've seen this on Google or they, saw someone on social media. And I never feel threatened by someone, bringing the education that they've received. My job is to listen to them, to synthesize the information, and then use my experience to give them my opinion. And so someone may come into my office convinced they have carpal tunnel, right? I saw, my neighbor says that I have it, and I saw a video of someone online. And my job is to say, listen, I listened to what you told me. You're telling me you're having tingling in your pinky, which actually is a different nerve, which is the ulnar nerve. And so you actually have something called cubital tunnel. But I never want anyone to feel ashamed because they were trying to help, take control of their own health by researching online. Now, that is a caveat of not all information online is created equal. And this is part of why I created this app, Feel Better, was because I believe people deserve a place online where the information is coming from credible, vetted professionals.
Now, this app you're talking about, because this is very important, what scares me right now because of what I do, and I've seen so many scams and everything, because everyone's searching for looks and likes and loves and all this other nonsense, that a lot of times it's AI. It's not coming from a doctor. They're using some AI model and calling them doctor or something, and people are misdiagnosing. People actually can die by listening to basically online advice from a bot.
Yes. I mean, there are many problems with the current platforms. They prioritize negative information. They prioritize, as you said, views and likes. And when I set out to build my platform, we actually don't have view counts on the videos. We don't have like counts on the videos. For us, the measure of success for a video is how well did we curate the content from let's say you're looking about endometriosis, how well did we curate the content from an OBGYN doctor to someone who is looking for information about endometriosis? That's what is a successful for us, viewing experience.
One of the things I see a lot of is, listen, I've been practicing law a long time. I have 30 years. I'm licensed in 18 states. Anytime somebody tries something new, the establishment, rattle, how can I say it? It gets tough because people in your industry this is not the way we do things. This is not professional. This is not this. And I can't I'm sure you've gotten a lot of love from certain doctors, but you probably also have gotten the bad end where people go, well, they shouldn't be doing that. They shouldn't be doing this stuff because they're just not willing to do it themselves. They built their practice on other things. They haven't been out there. They haven't had to go to the internet. They haven't done these things. I can't imagine what it's like being a professional and being very knowledgeable and having to take crap from your peers because you do TikTok videos.
I will tell you that, as I said, my videos have been viewed 150 million times on TikTok. They are very popular. It's a very successful channel. I have never had more online hate than when I would post a video on LinkedIn. And what I tell people, the worst kind of troll is an educated troll. And that's exactly what you're talking about. I find that from the establishment. But in the end, we have to meet people where they are, and they're online, they're on social media. And in my opinion, healthcare does not start when you get to your doctor's office. Healthcare starts on your phone. And right now, people are using their phone to get information, and doctors, we have lost that race to be the first voice. And what Feel Better really is an attempt to put us back in that conversation, to bring us back as your trusted source.
Now, Feel Better, this group that exists, about how many people are out there part of this group?
So the app just launched actually last week at a conference where I was the keynote speaker the year before, patients with chronic illness. So it's technically live on the App Store, Feel Better BETR, and we are growing our library of content from the different content creators. But we have about 100 different physicians, health foundations, science-backed brands who are focused on medical education. And now we are going to start bringing on the users to add kind of their experience and be able to share their stories on the platform as well.
COVID was terrible. And at the same time, I think it allowed us to change the way we do things. Unbelievably, like, for example, I have a lot of hearings and they're by Zoom now. I do depositions by Zoom. I do so many things because we realized, hey, we don't have to be in the room with you 24/7 to get something done. And I can actually double or triple my time helping people than I do, I'm in my car for 6 hours every week or something like that. I can't imagine how it changed your practice.
For certain specialties, I think that the telehealth model is ideal, right? You're going to your endocrinologist where you're primarily just reviewing lab work, and listening to your new symptoms. However, as an orthopedic surgeon, I need to examine you. I need to feel, like what your elbow, is it stable? I need to test your nerves. And I actually think it puts us at a disadvantage if we rely on telehealth. So I think you have to do it situation by situation, and acknowledge that for some people, if they have to take off an entire day of work to go to their doctor's appointment, that's not helpful to them. Right. So like, how can we, again, meet people where they are? And then hopefully that frees up the doctor's time for inpatient visits for the people who really need those types of visits.
Right now, and I've watched this. All the firms I've owned in my life, we've always covered healthcare, and I've noticed these huge changes in healthcare over the last 20 years. I can't just go to the foot doctor now. I have to go to my primary. There's so many hoops they make you jump through to be able to see a doctor, and by the time you actually get your appointment, for example, I can't see a dentist for 4 months, and it seems crazy. And what changed so significantly to stop this, or was it always like this and I was just living in some fantasy land?
A lot of systemic issues are at play. For example, dermatologists now, good luck finding someone to just do a skin check, right? They're doing Botox injections and they're doing cosmetic procedures that bring in the revenue that keeps the practice going, right? And if your practice has been bought by a private equity firm, okay, who do you think they want you to see? 100 people who need Botox or 100 people who need skin cancer prevention checks? So this is the system, this is the model that we are now, living in. And where I see the biggest problem is where 20, 30 years ago, where insurance was the middleman, insurance is now the omnipresent man. And insurance is really dictating how we are able to deliver care.
When I grew up, the idea was you want to be a doctor or a lawyer. Those are, if you're going to be successful, that's what you're going to do. And I think because of the way the government limits the amounts you can bill, I think a lot of doctors are struggling just to survive. That, their malpractice insurance. I mean, so they wind up having to work for these companies where they're limited on how much money they make. And I think that lowers the standard on what kind of doctor you're going to get now. You're going to get somebody who, it's I just seen this change, and I don't know if you've noticed it because I can't imagine trying to bill. Oh, and now I have to sell a cream to pay for my business practice. It seems crazy.
Correct. When I first started my practice, I graduated 10 years ago from orthopedic surgery fellowship. And because I wanted to stay in the city, there were no job openings. I started my own practice. I physically hung my own shingle. All right. I was only one out of 750 orthopedic surgeons to do that year. All right. So the model in which we practice has changed. And a lot of people talk about the issue of burnout with doctors. And I actually think it's the wrong term. I used to do 110 hours a week during residency, taking call Q2 nights. We are able to work and tolerate, long periods of time. It's that we are devalued. It's that our compensation is not commensurate with the expectation we have for the amount of expertise we bring to a situation and the amount of risk and malpractice that we take on. It's that we are not as respected in the community anymore. And all of these things just kind of chip away at, like, well, who would want to do this in the first place?
It's so hard when I try to give that perspective because people treat their doctor so badly. When I'm in a hospital and I hear somebody yelling from the bed or and it's disgusting because these are people who were there to help them. And I don't know when this happened. I don't know when we stopped being decent to each other. And I'm going to blame the internet and social media. But I mean, these are people who your life's in their hand and you think you can just act so poorly with them.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a great representation on The Pit, one of the episodes where, the nurse was assaulted. And what I think the larger conversation is, right, is yes, I think in general there is a lack of respect, towards physicians, but we also have to acknowledge, well, what drove that person to that point, right? In that episode of The Pit, he was sitting in the waiting room for 8 hours, worried that he was having a heart attack and no one was paying any attention to him and he wasn't getting the care that he thought he deserved. So I think we have to talk about these issues, like stepping back, looking at both sides of the problem. And that's the only way we're really going to come up with the solutions.
Now, your memoir that just came out, Little Misdiagnosed, uh, 10 years ago, the changes in how you run a practice in comparison to now must feel like night and day.
When people ask me, so I am technically an out of network doctor, and people will say, like, oh, because you like want, so much money and everything. I was never allowed in the network because I wasn't considered valuable because I was just a solo one person doctor. They said, we don't need you. So I have always been an out of network doctor. And what I noticed is that for most patients, they have, maybe 10 years ago, they had a deductible that was like $500. And so, yeah, you would just go to your in network doctor. But now their deductible is $10,000. So you might as well see an out of network doctor because in some instances, it may even be cheaper and you're going to see a doctor sooner and probably get much more, personalized care. I'm going to see one of those doctors, but it brings me no joy to collect a fee from a patient. Okay. It absolutely brings me no joy to do that. And I have to understand that I have limited myself in terms of the people who I'm able to actually help. And part of why I took call for so long was that when I was taking call in the emergency room, I would say that I only received reimbursement for 1 out of every 10 patients that I actually took care of.
It's painful when you see you think it's helping, and the problem, well, you mentioned the insurance companies. Now I noticed they have a push all over the country to limit to do tort reform, and to say, oh, lawyers are hurting them. But the hard part about this is that yes, you are getting this reform, but they're not lowering their costs of insurance to doctors. It wasn't like the malpractice insurance went down. I don't think it has ever gone down in the idea that they're going to go, okay, we're doing this to protect ourselves, but you're expanding your profits. You're not helping these doctors.
Correct. So I will say that there is a difference, for example, and it is directly related to tort reform, because when I started my practice in New York, my malpractice insurance was $100,000. So before I ever saw a patient, I had to pay $100,000 in medical malpractice. I had a junior resident of mine start his own practice in California. And when I was kind of advising him and telling him about what fees to expect, he said, well, my malpractice is $5,000. I said, that cannot be true. And he said, no, that's what it is. And that is because California has tort reform. So I think you're absolutely right that, for example, if New York State had tort reform, I don't think they're only charging us $5,000.
No,
right?
no, I don't see that happening.
But it does help, in the overall scheme of things. But who is it helping? And if it's just helping the insurance companies get the benefit of those, decreased, costs that they bear, then it's not actually helping the physicians who they're supposed to be serving.
One of the last questions I want to cover, because it is scary, AI diagnosis. I know there are a lot of people who go, well, sometimes it's better for the AI to diagnose you than a doctor. And I'm like going, yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm sorry.
So what I tell people is I think AI is an incredible tool to empower your relationship with your doctor. And what I mean by that is, let's say you come down with something, you don't know, have any idea what's going on. I recommend that you use ChatGPT to say, these are my symptoms. These are, if you have like positive test results, can you give me a differential diagnosis of 5 conditions? And then you use that to kind of start the conversation with your doctor. But you should not be letting AI diagnose you or listening to someone else's story and let that diagnose you, but let that guide you to have a more educated conversation with your doctor.
All right. On the way out the door, I just want to make sure I cover this. Little Miss Diagnosed is available on Amazon. What else?
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookstores. There would bring me no more joy than if you went to your local library and asked for a copy so that it can be, shared, through the generations.
And Feel Better, they can download that app I assume it's available on all platforms.
Correct. It's on the App Store. It's Feel Better, BETR. If you're more of a podcast person, I host the Medical Detectives podcast. If you like Dateline meets Grey's Anatomy. So I'm here for all of the mediums that you like to consume medical information.
Well, it was great talking to Dr. Erin Nance, and I wish you continued success, and I hope everything goes the way you want it to go.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It was a pleasure.